Hello, I'm James Freed. Welcome to my watercolor workshop. Today we'll be learning how to mix colors by creating a color wheel. We'll start with a limited palette of just 8 colors and use those to mix any color you need. I will also be sharing how I approach color mixing using watercolors and how to create beautiful neutral gray and brown mixes using complementary hues. A limited palette does not mean limited color possibilities, just the opposite actually. So get your painting materials set up and we'll get started. So this is my studio setup for painting in watercolor, and from left to right I have 2 containers of water. I like to use 2, that way I can keep one for cooler colors and one for warmer colors, and it helps keep your color fresh. When you mix the cools and the warms, it tends to neutralize them and can get really muddy very quickly. Then I have some mixing trays here in a small butcher tray. These are just small 6-well plastic mixing trays, very inexpensive. You can get them from almost any art store. I like these a lot. I have my watercolor paper here. I also have a color wheel example that we're going to be working from. We're going to create our own color wheel. And this is the downloadable format for the color wheel that you can copy from. And that's available in the materials that I'm sending you. I also have some watercolor paper off to the side here that allows me to test a color and a value before I actually apply it onto the finished work that we're going to be working on. You can see some examples of that here. Up here I've got my little painter's palette. This is actually a cool little portable palette that I just got a few weeks ago, and it comes empty without the paint, so it allows it to be inexpensive, and then you can put your own paint colors in there. So I've filled it up with the palette that I like to use, plus a few extra colors that I might use on occasion. Then here are the colors that we're going to be using. This is New Gamboge. This is a warm yellow. This is Windsor yellow. This is kind of a neutral to cooler yellow. This is what we're going to be using for our primary red. It's called quinacridone red. And most of these are by Winsor Newton. This is permanent alizarin crimson. When you get the color alizarin crimson, make sure that you get the permanent version, because the non-permanent version is what we call fugitive, and when it's exposed to light it will fade over time. This does not fade as easily. Then the blues, I have a kind of a reddish blue. It's called indanthrene blue. Then my primary blue is going to be French ultramarine. And then I have a greenish blue, which is called phthalo blue. Actually, this is called phthalo turquoise. And this allows for some mixing of beautiful greens. And then I have a neutralized color. I like to use raw umber to create really dark versions of colors and to help neutralize colors as well. So it's a dark earth tone, kind of a cool dark earth tone. And you may notice that I have more colors in my palette, but these are the 8 colors that we're going to be working with in this workshop today. Working with a limited number of colors helps you to create a palette that mixes well, and all the colors that you mix from it will play well together in your paintings. So this is just a sheet of cold press watercolor paper. This is 140 pound watercolor paper. This is by Winsor Newton, but you can get any brand that you like. I also like Arches, is one of my favorite brands. This just happened to be a sheet that I had left over, and it's 11 by 15. That's kind of the size of this that I'm working with today. Yours can be whatever you'd like to use. Probably not too much smaller than this, but if you have a sheet or a block that you'd like to use that's close to this size, go ahead and do that. And I've recreated the color wheel outline here on this page. All right, and here I've got my colors laid out and in the same arrangement that I have up, having them laying on the table here. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and paint a swatch of each of the colors full strength at the top of these bars. and then I will do a graded wash where that progressively gets lighter as it comes down. So this kind of gives you an idea of the range of value that each one of these colors right out of the tube can make. And over here in our color wheel, we'll start off with the primary colors and put those in, and then which are red, yellow, and blue. For those, we're going to be using the quinacridone red. Here we're going to be using Winsor yellow, and here we're going to be using French ultramarine for the blue. Then we will mix those primaries to create our secondaries, which are orange when you mix red and yellow, green when you mix yellow and blue, and violet when you mix red and blue. And the reason that we've got more than just the three colors of primaries is that we have one on each side that is warmer and one on each side that is cooler in temperature, so that helps create the color in the way that we want to see it on our paintings and in our palette. So as you can see, I am starting to apply the watercolor onto the paper here, and this is just going to show me what the colors look like when they're starting raw from the tube. And it's really good to have a knowledge of that and keep kind of a record of what those look like, so when you're looking to make mixtures, you can see what you're using to mix from. And watercolor is a transparent medium, so the paint is meant to be mixed with water and then applied to the paper, and the white of the paper provides the value, the lightness coming through. We don't typically have white in watercolor. You can use white gouache, which is an opaque version of watercolor, to add highlights and things like that, but when we're mixing colors, we want to stick with the transparent watercolor medium here. So I am just now doing the warm side of the palette. The warm side of the palette are the reds, red, orange, orange, yellow, yellow, all the way over to yellow, green, and then it starts to be cooler all the way around to the red, violet. So warm side, cool side. And you can see this on the example that I've got here, the little pocket color wheel. These are actually really handy to have to keep in your painting kit, and it helps. These actually show what happens when you add different colors when you add the primary colors to these different colors to create the mixes. And we're going to do some of that today as well. But nice little pocket color wheel. And it also has a value scale on it. And on the other side, it has illustration of color relationships. So looking at monochromatic, analogous color schemes, complementary color schemes, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So when you download this artist color wheel, you'll want to just copy this onto a piece of watercolor paper. Just using pencil is fine. The way that I did this was I just used a compass, a drawing compass like this, and matched it to the dimensions of the color wheel here, and then I placed it on the paper. Then to do the segments, I just placed this on top and matched it up circle to circle, and then I used the pointy part of the compass just to punch little holes along the inside ring here, and I already had my center hole. And then you just line up a straight edge, like a ruler or a drawing triangle, and put in these 12 individual segments that we're going to create colors for. All right, so I've already started here. I've got the new gamboge down. That's a very warm orangey yellow. Then the Winsor yellow is kind of my primary yellow. It's kind of, it's still a warm color, but it's kind of in the middle of the yellow spectrum between cool and warm. And now I'm going to go for my red. I've got some quinacridone red here in my palette. I'm going to take a kind of a big goopful on my brush like this. I'm going to apply it to one of these little mixing trays. And then I'm going to add some water to it. And then I load the brush up so that the brush is full of water and paint. Watercolor brushes are designed to hold a lot of paint in its watery form. And that way you can complete long strokes without having to recharge the brush. I just carefully apply it here. I've just drawn these out using a ruler. You can, they don't have to be exactly like mine. You can make them similarly on your paper. That's fine, whatever works for you. And I'm using a flat brush here. I believe this is a number 4. That's a 10mm flat brush, but whatever you got in a watercolor brush is fine. You do not need to go out and spend hundreds of dollars on watercolor brushes. I mean, you can, but you can find decent ones, in the $15 to $20 range. And for this exercise, you only need a couple of flats. I'm going to separate my brushes between the warm and the cool colors. And again, that'll help keep the colors crisper. So there's my quinacridone red, my primary red. And as long as I have my brush loaded, I'm going to go ahead and put it down on my color wheel here too. So I'm just using my hand, kind of moving in an arc and filling in that little segment. And I find that it helps to label these colors on here before you get started so you get the correct orientation and the correct placement. We're starting with the red at the top. Some color wheels start with the yellow at the top. Doesn't really matter as long as the relationships are the same. And I just try to keep the edges neat. Watercolor paper has material applied to it when it's being made. It's called sizing, and it allows the cotton fibers of the paper to accept the paint equally throughout the whole sheet. Without the sizing, you can get splotches and you can get uneven application of paint, which you definitely don't want. So there's my quinacridone red, nice primary red, very juicy, beautiful red color. The next color that I'm going to put up here on the color bars are permanent alizarin crimson. So I dip that into my brush here and get a good goop of that. This is a very strong color. You don't need a lot to get a really nice strong color. I'm applying more water here because it is such a strong color, and I got a good consistency here. Again, when you're working with watercolor, the color should be strong, but it should still be transparent. You should still be able to see the white of the paper coming through when you apply it. And alizarin crimson is a very beautiful crimson red, kind of like a burgundy wine or a Cabernet wine. So it moves more towards the violet side of red, has a lot of blue in it. It's a great mixing color. Can also make some very rich browns and some very, very beautiful dark greens that are trending toward brown. I use it a lot in both watercolor and in oil paint when I'm painting in oils. It's one of my go-to mixing colors. Okay. And now I'm going to move to the cooler side of the palette. I'm going to start off with indanthrine blue. Grab some of that from my watercolor palette here, my little portable palette, and move that over to some mixing trays over here. This is a really rich, dark, kind of like a blue-violet, but just before it becomes violet, it's still very much a true blue color, but it has a red tendency in it. It's a gorgeous color, kind of jewel-like. Add some water to this, a little bit more. I've switched out my water so that there was a lot of paint in it from mixing up the warms, so now I'm gonna just use this color, this water here, to make the cooler colors. Here's indanthrine blue going on to the scale. All right, gorgeous. Rinse the brush off really well. I'm using a different brush now, my cool color brush. And the next one up is ultramarine, French ultramarine. That's what we're going to be using for our primary blue. So I'm going to grab up some of that from my palette and add some water to it. And using these palette trays it makes it easier to mix up larger volumes of paint when you're painting, plein air. If you're outdoors painting, then you have these smaller mixing trays on your palette, and that you can get away with that. Sometimes I'll bring a smaller butcher pan to work with too. But if you're in the studio and you're working on something larger, or you're trying to like do color mixing to just discover new color mixes, then it's nice to mix up a good volume of these paints. So these little palettes, these little palette wells really work well for that. So you can get quite a bunch of water in here and then charge it up with paint and get it to the consistency that you want. So you can, once you've mixed up a color, if you want to apply it, over a broader area of the painting, it's nice to have that color already mixed and ready to go, so that you, in good volume, so that you don't have to keep mixing it and mixing it and mixing it. All right, there's my French ultramarine in good shape there. I'm going to apply that onto our little color bar scale here. And you can see this is a really rich dark blue. It also has a bit of red in it, and this is also our primary blue, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that in on the color wheel. Adding just a little bit more paint to this mixture. So here we go. I'm going to put the French ultramarine in on the color wheel. The sizing on the paper also helps control the edges of your painting. So if you're just painting wet paint onto dry paper, you can control the edge pretty easily. The paint won't tend to spread. But if you get the paper wet before you paint on it, then the paint will spread to wherever the paper is wet. So that technique's called painting wet into wet. And here we're painting wet into dry. Because we're trying to keep nice, clean demarcation between colors here on our little color wheel. And this is also just good brush practice, kind of getting a handle on how to control your brush. Beautiful. Now we have our primaries down on the color wheel. And we have two other colors to put into the mix here on our scales. So let's go ahead and grab some phthalo turquoise, that funny spelling. This is a beautiful color. This works well for mixing up ocean colors, especially in the tropics, like in Hawaii. I usually will reach for my phthalo turquoise when mixing up ocean water. It also is a beautiful mixing blue for creating greens, really rich greens. And then the last color that I'm going to add to this palette is called Raw Umber. It's an earth color. It's actually originally dirt from Umbria in Italy, is where this color came from, Umbria. And it is a really deep, rich brown color. You can mix this color from the primaries. It's a little tricky to get it as dark as you can get it when you get it out of the tube, but it's still possible. It's a lot easier just to use the already mixed one in the tube. And I use this for darkening some colors and for creating the darkest versions of greens and reds and purples. It also neutralizes them a little bit. You can make a beautiful black using raw umber, French ultramarine, and alizarin crimson. It makes this beautiful, in school we call it special black. I tend to not use black paint when I'm painting, especially outdoors, because it's too flat and it's just got a very, very dense black color. The darks look much better if you mix them from colors. So I'm going to put some raw umber down and show you what that color looks like. Another color that I use sometimes in place of the raw umber is called Payne's Gray. It's a very, very, very dark bluish gray that's already been somewhat neutralized. And when I say neutralized, it means that you mix the colors complement. So whenever you mix colors across the color wheel from each other, those are called complementary colors, and it tends to neutralize the color or gray it down. And you'll be seeing what that looks like later on in this workshop. So here's my raw umber. It's kind of a flat, neutral brown. And there's that. So I'm going to do a graded wash using this raw umber, and just to show you what this is going to look like. And then I will do the same for all the other colors off camera. But the technique is similar for all of them. So what you want to do is start off with your brush loaded up with the color. And go ahead and put it on full strength near the top. I'm going to leave a little white space just so you can see that where it started. And you want to get as much paint on going as you can, so that you have a little bit of a lip at the leading edge here. And I'm working on a slightly angled desktop. My drawing table here, it's got a slight lean to it, so that it's going to tend to want to go downhill this way. And each time I go to apply paint here. This happens sometimes. You make a little mistake and spill some paint. It's okay. It'll wipe right up. That's why I have a little sponge right here. Works great. So now I'm just adding water to this paint. And as you add water, it lightens it. So you want to keep that leading edge wet. So like a little bead of wet paint at the very leading edge of this, and pull it down a little bit, pull it down a little bit, and then add some water to the brush, and pull it down some more, pull it down some more. Then add some water to the brush, and pull it down some more. And what that's doing is it's diluting the paint as I pull down here, and we're getting a gradation style wash. Until it's very, very, very faint. And at the bottom, you'll still be left with that little lip of color there. And you can take your sponge or a paper towel and just sop up the excess. And that shows you the full strength and how it can be tinted with water to get down to the least amount of color that you can apply there. And that is a graded wash. All right, we're going to get started here and actually mixing the secondary colors to apply to our color wheel, and then the tertiaries as well. So just to recap, secondary colors are the colors that you get when you mix the two primaries that are next to each other. So red and yellow we're going to mix to make orange, yellow and blue we're going to mix to make green, and red and blue we're going to mix to get violet. Another tool that you might find handy to have in the studio with you to help speed things along is a little hair dryer. And I use this to dry the paint as I'm going. You want to keep it on a low setting and keep it kind of up and away from the paper, but it will help to dry the color so that you can move on to the next one without worrying about bleeding into it. All right, so we're going to work on the warm side of the palette here. And I'm going to start off mixing an orange. And the orange that you want to get is that real traditional, beautiful pumpkin orange. So a definite mixture between the yellow and the red. And the way that you do that is you start off with the lightest color first. So I'm going to take some yellow, and I'm just going to put them in a separate mixing well here. And then I'm going to take some of the New Gamboge, since this is a very orangey yellow already. I'm going to add quite a bit of that. Get that nice and full in there. And then rinse my brush off before I go into the next one. I'm going to grab some of the quinacridone red. Now I'm going to start off with just a little bit and see how it goes. Again, that color we're looking for is a rich pumpkin-y orange. See how much that was just, a quick dip of the brush into the well there with quinacridone red, and I've got a pretty nice orange started there too. Maybe I got lucky and just nailed it at the first shot. Let's see. This is the reason we've got our little test strips over here, test paper. I can put a little bit down and see how it looks. Wow, that is a pretty good secondary orange right there. So it's halfway between the red and the yellow. It is orange. I've labeled all of these with the color that's going to go in there. So I'm going to go ahead and put the orange in. Now notice I've mixed up quite a bit here. I want to keep that because I'm going to use this to create these other two colors here. So I might hit this with the hairdryer. Get it started done drying there. And so now I've got my nice secondary. I'm going to go to the slightly lighter color first. So I'm going to start with my yellow, just the Winsor yellow. Get a brush full of that. Put in another well over here. And then add just a little bit of my regular orange mixture. See how that looks. I'll go on to my test sheet here. What we're aiming for is something that's kind of halfway between this and that. That looks pretty good. So when we're talking about color, there's several different terminology that you can use to describe color. And one of those is hue, H-U-E. And hue refers to the actual color itself. So the name of the color, like yellow, blue, red, orange, those are all hues. And then colors can also be warm or cool, depending on which side of the color wheel they're on. And then there is chroma, which describes the saturation of the color. How strong is that color? So when we were doing the laying down the color and then mixing water in to tint it out, the lighter value of that color has less chroma or less saturation. Then there's value, which is how dark or how light the color is compared to a 10 value scale. 0 being almost white and 10 being the darkest version of that color. All right, so this was a bit of the mixture of the orange that we already made up and with some of the Winsor yellow in it. Now I'm going to go back to that orange that we'd already made up, and I'm going to add some red to it. So I'm going to take some of this orange and I'm going to go into another little pile here. And I'm going to dip my brush into the red and add some red to this and see how we go here. So this wants to be red-orange, halfway between orange and red in hue. I'm going to try that and see how that looks on the paper. So it looks pretty good. We've got quite a bit of our warm side done here. I'm going to hit it with a hairdryer. And once it starts to dry, you can really start to see if that color is what you want. And I'm looking at the red orange now, and it's very close to my regular orange. I think I need to put just a little bit more red. When I notice that the shift between the red and the red orange is very abrupt here, while the shift between the red orange and the orange itself is not so. So I'm going to add a little bit more red to this mixture and just hit it one more time. Since it's already wet, I think I need to just flow paint in there. I can't, don't want to go in with a dry brush because that will cause a back run. And a back run is makes a mess of your paint. It's where it actually, the water that you're introducing pushes the color away from where it had been originally placed down. So when you go to add color into an already wet area, make sure that your brush is really charged up with paint. Otherwise, it'll create a back run. That looks a little better. So a little adjustment on the fly there. Sometimes you'll notice that the difference more once the color is dry. All right, I think that's going to work out. Now I'm going to mix up my next secondary. Between red and blue, we're going to get violet. And for this, I'm going to use, I'm going to start with the ultramarine with a little bit of indanthrene, and then adding the alizarin crimson in to create the violet. And start with my ultramarine. Get a good portion of that in there. And just a little bit of indanthrene. There we go. Darkens it down. The violet tends to be the darkest color on the color wheel. And I rinse my brush off before I stick it into the alizarin because I want to keep that alizarin pure. And I get a handful of that, a brush full of that, and I put it in. What you're looking for here is kind of a grape jelly, grape purple color. That nice, beautiful violet color. You'll kind of know it when you see it. That's it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this down. Ultramarine is a very granular color. When they mix the components of the paint, the pigments, it actually has a lot of kind of sandy grain texture to it. So it sinks, those grains sink into the little wells inside the paper and can create some really beautiful textures, which you can see here in the ultramarine and then also here in the violet because of the ultramarine we use to mix it with. So ultramarine can actually add texture to your color. All right, so we have violet. I'm going to go ahead and add, take some of this and create the red violet. So we'll just grab a handful of the violet, go next door here to this other little well. Add that in. And I'm going to take a little bit of alizarin and add that in. See how that looks? I'm going to go a little bit more. Again, I'm rinsing my brush before I go into the other color so I don't contaminate it. And then I'm going to take a little bit of quinacridone. Just a little bit left there from my original mix. I'm going to grab some of that. There we go. Put a little bit of that in that mix. A little bit more. So this wants to be kind of right between the violet and the red. And this is one of the trickier ones to get. It's kind of like got a claret, almost a crimson, but a little bit more purpley than a crimson. Oops, I just went into the violet. It's mostly dry in there, but I'm going to get a little bit of a background in there, so I'm going to try to hit it with the sponge before it goes. Actually, I'm going to just hit it with the brush before it goes too far. You can always throw a little bit more violet in there when it dries. That's why I keep the colors. Mix up more than you think you need. Go back and fix that. Watercolor has a little bit of a mind of its own. You can try to control it, but it will do what it do. All right. I'm just going to go back in with a little bit of violet and see if we can't fix that little problem. When the paint's been sitting for a little while in these wells, sometimes the constituents will separate from each other, so it's always a good idea to mix it up a little bit, especially when using ultramarine. You know, those granular colors will kind of sink to the bottom of the well, so just mix it up a little bit more. And I'm just going to hit it with a quick pass here, just to get more violet on there. Mischief managed. All right, so for our last of the blue-violet range, we're going to do add some ultramarine blue first, start with that, and then add some of the violet color to that, and we should get our blue-violet, which is also a really pretty color. Again, getting a scoopful of the violet that we mixed up, and then a scoopful of blue, ultramarine blue. And this should be a color that's partway between the blue and the violet. Try this, see how this looks. Oh yeah. That'll do. So when you're painting with watercolor, you definitely, when you're filling an area, you want to have your brush charged with paint, meaning that it's got a lot of paint and water in it. It's because these are watercolor brushes are designed to hold a lot of water so that you can get a nice amount of paint down onto the surface. Here's the blue-violet. It's looking pretty good. I like that. All right, the last color range that we're going to mix up are the greens. So our secondary green is going to be a mixture of blue and yellow. And instead of using a lot of the ultramarine, we're actually going to start off with the yellow, and we're going to add a little bit of the phthalo turquoise to it, and then a little tiny bit of the ultramarine, and see what we get. We might even add a little bit of indanthrene. What we're looking for is a really gorgeous sap green or a Kermit the Frog green, and we'll know it when we see it. Going to start with the yellow. And just kind of fill my little palette up, little well here with some yellow. So I've got a good amount of yellow in there. And then I'm going to rinse my brush off really well. And I'm going to reach for some phthalo turquoise. And dip my brush in and then get some of it off, and then go into my yellow here. And that's pretty nice. It's still a little light. So I'm going to try a little bit of ultramarine. Darken it down a little bit. It's getting nice looking. I don't use the gamboge for this because it's got a lot of red in it, and if I do that, this can turn brown and muddy looking, so just beware. What I'm looking for is that bright springy green. You'll tell by the color of your rinse water when you're getting close. All right, we got it. So here's my green. I'm gonna go onto the green wedge here. Notice how when it's transparent against the white of the paper, it really starts to sing. It's a beautiful, rich green, a grass green or akin to if you've ever painted in oil paints, the sap green. So next I'm going to do the blue-green because I'm already kind of working on the cooler side here, and I'll do the yellow-green last. So I'm going to take that mixture that I had, I'm just going to add a little bit more ultramarine to it. Also, for these colors that you're mixing on these little trays, you can keep using it. Even if after it dries out, you can just let it dry out, and then you can recharge it with water, and you can just keep using it. There's no reason to waste watercolor. It's getting closer. So the blue-green should definitely have a kind of a bluer cast to it. I'm going to put a little bit more of this turquoise in. Phthalo turquoise. There we are. The phthalo is a very strong color, so when you're mixing it in, be very judicious. Don't go too much phthalo all at once, because then it'll just be phthalo all day long. It's hard to mix it down once you have too much in. I went to art school at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, and I had an amazing color teacher. Her name was Judy Crook, and she just knew so much and was so generous in imparting her knowledge to her students and working with her students. And she was just a very kind and very knowledgeable artist, and I learned so much from her. Unfortunately, she passed away while we were still there in school. It's very sad, but I'll always remember her. All right, there's my blue-green. And we're going to go for a yellow-green, so that's going to be Winsor yellow plus the green that you mixed. So let's start with the Winsor yellow. Get your brush really clean before you dip into the yellow. You're not going to need a whole lot of green to make this go yellow-green, so just be warned. All right, so there's my yellow. A little bit more water in there. And then I'm just going to dip my brush in the green mixture, in the secondary green that I've saved here. And put that in. And see what we got. That was already too much green. I need a little more yellow. It's close, not quite. There it is. It's a very bright, springy green. Add a little more water here. That looks just about right. I'm gonna hit it on my tester here. Yeah, that looks good. Last color. And there is your color wheel. So we have our primaries, red, yellow, and blue. This triangle shows those primaries and the relationship on the color wheel. Then you mix those primaries together on either side, yellow and red, you get to our orange. That's what these secondary lines are showing, the secondary colors. And then the tertiary colors are mixed from in between those. All right, so we'll come back and a little bit talk about how to create neutral colors from mixing complements.